I thought loyalty still meant something in the corporate world. After all, I was the guy who stayed late, skipped weekends, and built the system that saved my company millions every year. My manager shook my hand, praised me in front of the executives, and then, weeks later, looked me straight in the eyes and said I was overpaid. That one sentence gutted me, twisted like a knife in my chest. But I wasn't about to stay quiet. If he thought he could bury me after I made him look like a hero, he had no idea what was coming. Hi, I'm Daniel Carter. I'm a 34-year-old guy working as a senior data systems analyst for a mid-sized logistics company based out of Chicago. To most people, that probably sounds boring. Numbers, servers, code, it's not glamorous. But I was good at it. No, scratch that, I was damn good at it. My whole life I'd been the type to tear things apart and rebuild them better. Where other kids wanted to play basketball, I was ripping apart old computers, stacking spare parts like Lego, teaching myself how to streamline everything. Efficiency wasn't just my job. It was my obsession. When I joined the company 6 years ago, it was a mess. They were leaking money everywhere, bad routing systems, outdated tracking, constant human errors. Packages got lost daily. Their software was practically from the Stone Age. I knew from the interview that if they didn't fix their systems soon, they'd drown. But they hired me, and I got to work. The first year, I stayed late most nights, fueled by vending machine coffee and the thrill of fixing something broken. I built an automated routing algorithm that cut wasted miles by 30%. I streamlined their inventory scanning so boxes no longer vanished into thin air. I built dashboards so managers could actually see what the hell was happening in real time. By year 3, I'd saved the company nearly $12 million in losses, waste, and inefficiencies. My boss, Mark, used to pat me on the back in meetings, bragging about me to executives. Dan here is the guy keeping us afloat. Couldn't do it without him. I'd smile, nod, and get back to work, because that was who I was. I didn't want the spotlight. I wanted the systems to work. But what happens when your value becomes too obvious? When you're the one holding everything together, but instead of being rewarded, you're told you're too expensive. That's where this story takes a turn. Because I learned, painfully, that saving millions doesn't make you irreplaceable. It makes you a target. And that realization was the beginning of my downfall. I used to think I understood Mark, my manager. He wasn't the kind of boss you saw in motivational posters or LinkedIn humblebrags. He was loud, always on, the type of guy who thrived on being in the center of the room. He loved meetings. He loved talking. He loved being seen. And for years, that dynamic worked fine. He was the face, I was the machine. He'd strut around with my numbers on a PowerPoint slide, and I'd sit in the back, quietly satisfied that at least someone noticed. But slowly, I started to see it, the cracks in the foundation. It began when I noticed him taking more than just credit. It wasn't Dan and I built this system. It was I built a system with my team. Or worse, just I built this system. He'd slap me on the back after, like that erased the sting of being erased. At first, I brushed it off. Office politics, right? The guy's insecure. He needs to shine. That's fine. I don't need the spotlight. Then came the small cuts. He started dropping little comments about my salary in casual conversations. Wow, you must be living nice, huh Dan? That analyst pay doesn't look too bad when you add those bonuses. People would laugh, and I'd chuckle along, but it hit me wrong. Why the hell was my paycheck a punchline? Especially when I was the reason his department's numbers looked so damn good? I remember one Thursday afternoon, he leaned on my desk while I was knee-deep in code, sipping his iced coffee, and said, "You know, Dan, sometimes I wonder if the company realizes how much they're paying you. Like, don't get me wrong, you're great, but still." Then he grinned like it was a joke and walked away before I could say anything. That moment stuck with me. I went home that night, sat at my kitchen counter with a beer, and thought about it over and over. Too much? Overpaid? The words gnawed at me. I wasn't some inflated exec with a golden parachute. I was working 60-hour weeks, plugging holes in a sinking ship. If anything, I was underpaid. But it wasn't just Mark. He started whispering into other ears, too. I could see it in the way people looked at me. My coworkers, the other analysts, started making comments like, "Hey big spender, you got lunch today, right?" Or "Man, with what you make, you probably don't even notice gas prices." At first it was lighthearted, but there was an edge under it. Like they'd been primed. Like Mark had painted me as some spoiled golden boy. And the worst part? I started to believe maybe he was setting me up for something. The final straw before the real betrayal hit came at an all-hands meeting. Mark was giving his usual speech, showing off our quarterly savings. I'd just finished rolling out an update that cut manual routing by another 20%, a massive deal. Millions saved. And instead of calling me out, instead of giving even a nod to the work, he said, "This is what happens when leadership knows how to run a tight ship." Leadership. Meaning him. I felt my chest go tight. My ears buzzed. I sat there in the back row, hands clasped under the table so no one could see me digging my nails into my palms, and thought, this man is stealing my blood, sweat, and tears, and he's proud of it. That night, for the first time, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, replaying his words, hearing that smug tone. And underneath all the anger was something worse, fear. Because if he could twist the story like that, if he could erase me in front of executives, what was to stop him from making me the problem? The cracks were widening. And I knew, deep down, the collapse was coming. But I didn't yet realize just how brutal it would be. I remember the day with perfect clarity. It was late October, one of those raw Chicago mornings where the wind slices through your coat like a knife. I got to the office before sunrise, as usual, my breath clouding in the cold air as I swiped my badge and climbed into the fluorescent lit silence of the building. I liked those quiet hours, before the noise of meetings and chatter. Just me, the hum of servers, and the glow of my monitors. That morning, I was running tests on a new optimization I'd built, something that would reduce warehouse bottlenecks during peak shipping season. If it worked, the company could handle holiday demand without bleeding overtime costs. Millions in savings. Again. By the time people started trickling in, I had the numbers ready. And they were beautiful. My algorithm cut processing delays by 45%. I felt electric, like I'd cracked some impossible code. This was my thing, building order out of chaos, streamlining the mess. At 10 sharp, Mark called me into his office. I still remember how smug he looked behind his desk, leaning back in his chair, spinning a pen between his fingers like he was the damn CEO. His walls were plastered with leadership books he'd never read and motivational posters that made me want to puke. "Dan, close the door," he said. I did. Sat down. He gave me this tight little smile. "Listen, I've been talking with upper management. Your work is great. Really, really great. But there's been some discussion about compensation across the board. Especially yours." My stomach dropped. "What about it?" He tapped his pen against his desk, still smiling like he was delivering good news. "Well, let's just say you're at the high end for your role. In fact, some people think you're, overpaid." There it was. The word again. Overpaid. My chest went hot, like someone had slapped me. I leaned forward, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mark, I've saved this company tens of millions in the last 3 years. Systems I built are the only reason we're even competitive. If anything, I'm underpaid." He chuckled. Like I was being naive. "Come on, Dan. Look, nobody's saying you're not valuable. But value is relative. You've got a good thing going here. Good salary, good benefits. You should be grateful." Grateful. That word hit harder than overpaid. I stared at him, stunned. My brain was screaming, grateful? For what? For working 60-hour weeks? For carrying your entire department on my back? For building the system you take credit for every quarter? But he just kept smiling, like this was some pep talk. "I mean, the execs love me right now because of what our team's delivering. That's good for you too, right? You're tied to a winning ship. Don't rock the boat." I walked out of his office in a daze, his words echoing in my head like poison. You should be grateful. That night, I couldn't eat. Couldn't sleep. I sat on my couch in the dark, laptop glowing in front of me, and thought about every hour I'd poured into this place. The weekends I skipped out on family trips. The nights I worked until my eyes blurred. And this was my reward? To be told my worth was too much? To be told I should thank them for not paying me less? And then the whispers started. The next week, one of the analysts, Brian, stopped by my desk and said, "Hey man, heard they're looking at your comp package upstairs. Must be nice to make exec money as an analyst." I froze. My blood turned cold. Mark. It had to be Mark. He was feeding this narrative, planting seeds. Slowly painting me as greedy, overpaid, replaceable. That's when the paranoia set in. Every glance in the break room, every snide joke about my fat paycheck, every awkward silence in meetings, I felt it all piling on. I wasn't being celebrated anymore. I was being set up. And Mark? He doubled down. In meetings, he'd cut me off when I tried to speak. He'd reframe my contributions as team efforts. He'd throw out lines like, "We're all working hard here, not just one person." Always with that smile. Always framing me as arrogant for daring to stand out. One night, I stayed late, trying to finish a report. Mark walked by, coat slung over his arm, keys jingling. He stopped in my doorway, smirked, and said, "You know, Dan, guys like you burn out fast. Maybe pace yourself. Don't want to make the higher-ups think you're trying too hard to justify your paycheck." And then he left. I sat there in the empty office, staring at my screen, heart pounding. That's when I knew. This wasn't just about ego anymore. Mark was building a case against me. He wanted me gone. And for the first time, I thought, if he wants war, he'll get war. It happened faster than I expected. One week, I was still the guy quietly saving the company millions. The next, I was sitting in a conference room under the glare of fluorescent lights, being dissected like a problem they needed to solve. The first strike came in the form of an email. It was a Thursday morning, 8:17 a.m., and I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when it hit my inbox. Subject line, Performance Alignment Discussion. From Mark. My stomach sank. I clicked it open. "Dan, please meet me in HR and conference room B at 2 p.m. today. We'll be discussing recent concerns and expectations going forward." Mark. Concerns. Expectations. My palms went cold. I sat back in my chair, rereading the words over and over. Concerns? What concerns? At 2 o'clock, I walked into that room and saw the setup. Mark at the head of the table, grinning like this was just another friendly check-in. HR rep sitting beside him, laptop open, fingers poised. I felt the walls close in. "Dan," Mark started, leaning back in his chair like some benevolent king, "we've noticed a pattern lately. You've been difficult in meetings. Defensive. Resistant to collaboration." I blinked at him, stunned. Defensive? "Mark, all I do is present the numbers. I answer questions. He cut me off with a sigh. "See? That right there. The tone. You're coming off as combative. And there's also concern about, well, alignment. We're a team here, Dan. But when one person positions themselves as the sole hero, it undermines morale." Sole hero. My throat went dry. This wasn't about performance. This was about the narrative. He was framing me exactly as I feared, arrogant, ungrateful, overpaid. HR chimed in, voice calm, rehearsed. "We've received feedback that your communication style can be alienating to colleagues. We just want to make sure we're all working toward the same culture of collaboration." I wanted to scream. Alienating? My so-called communication style was numbers, data, results. I wasn't the one whispering about paychecks or planting seeds of resentment. That was Mark. But he sat there, nodding gravely, like he was disappointed in me. Like this was all my fault. The knife twisted deeper when he pulled out a folder. "We've also reviewed compensation across the department," he said smoothly, sliding a sheet across the table. "Dan, your salary is significantly above the median for analysts. Now, I know you've delivered value in the past, but the question is sustainability. We can't justify paying one person at this level if it's going to create friction with the rest of the team." There it was. The word again. Justify. Like my existence required an explanation. I stared at the paper. They'd printed a neat little chart comparing my salary to the others in the department. My number stuck out like a sore thumb. Never mind that my results dwarfed theirs. Never mind that without my systems, those same people wouldn't even have jobs to do. To them, I wasn't an asset. I was a liability, a reminder that they were paying me what I was worth. I looked up at Mark. He held my gaze for a moment, then gave the faintest smirk. It wasn't for HR. It was for me. A silent message: I'm in control. You're already losing. The meeting ended with a performance improvement plan. Corporate speak for a leash. More check-ins. More collaboration requirements. More ways for Mark to box me in and document every move until he had enough to cut me loose. I walked out of that room numb. My head was spinning, my stomach twisted in knots. I sat at my desk, staring at my screen, unable to type a single line of code. All I could hear was his voice: "You should be grateful. Don't rock the boat. We can't justify paying you." That night, I didn't go home right away. I stayed late, the office empty except for the cleaning crew. My screen glowed in the darkness as I scrolled through months of emails, project reports, system logs. All of it. My fingerprints were on everything that kept this company alive. Every optimization, every dollar saved, Every innovation, I had the proof. And as I sat there, the fear in my chest started to change. It hardened. Turned sharp. Because if Mark wanted to turn me into the villain, then fine. Let him. But he had no idea what I was capable of when cornered. He thought he was the puppet master, pulling strings behind the scenes. But he didn't realize, I built the system. I was the system. And if I wanted to, I could burn it all down. I always thought I was the kind of man who could swallow pride. That as long as the work spoke for itself, I didn't need recognition, didn't need applause. But after that ambush in Conference Room B, after being told I was difficult, alienating, and, God help me, overpaid, something inside me snapped. For days, I walked around the office in a fog. I still did my work, still delivered results, but every interaction felt poisoned. People looked at me differently now. When I passed coworkers in the hallway, they'd offer stiff smiles, like they were afraid to get too close. Conversations quieted when I walked into the break room. Jokes about my salary grew sharper, less friendly, like they were daring me to defend myself. And Mark? He was thriving. He'd saunter past my desk, clapping me on the shoulder like we were buddies, always loud enough for others to hear. How's my star player doing? Keeping us rich, I hope. His grin would linger just long enough to remind me it wasn't praise, it was mockery. He'd taken everything I'd done for this company and twisted it into ammunition against me. The worst part? He had the room convinced. One afternoon, I overheard two junior analysts whispering near the printer. Honestly, I don't get why he makes so much, one said. Yeah, the other replied. I mean, he's good, sure, but we're all working hard. Why should he be special? I stood there, holding my papers, heat rising in my face. They didn't even notice me walk by. Or maybe they did and didn't care. Either way, the knife dug deeper. I started dreading work. The job I once loved, the challenge, the thrill of building something elegant from chaos, felt like a cage. I'd sit at my desk, staring at code, and instead of pride I felt resentment. My hands trembled with anger as I typed. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. It was a Friday morning, and Mark had scheduled a team meeting. We all crammed into the glass conference room, the city skyline sprawling behind him as he stood at the front, strutting like a game show host. He clicked through slides of our performance metrics, talking about efficiency gains, savings, customer satisfaction. All my work. Every single number on those slides had my fingerprints on it. And then, he dropped the bomb. I'm proud to announce, he said, beaming, that I'll be presenting our department's achievements at the Executive Summit next month. It's a huge honor, and it shows how far we've come as a team. I couldn't have done it without all of you. The room broke into polite applause. My stomach churned. He didn't even mention me. Not once. Then, as if twisting the knife wasn't enough, he added, now, I know some of you have had concerns about fairness in compensation. I want you all to know that leadership is looking at aligning pay across roles. We value everyone equally here. I felt like I'd been punched. Aligning pay. I knew exactly what that meant. Cut mine. Or worse, push me out entirely. I sat there, staring at him, fists clenched under the table. He caught my eye for just a second, and I swear he smirked. Not a big grin, not for anyone else to notice. Just a flicker at the corner of his mouth. A private message, just for me, checkmate. That night, I didn't go home. I stayed in the office long after everyone else had left, sitting in the dark glow of my monitors. My mind was spinning, my chest tight, my jaw aching from how hard I'd been grinding my teeth. And then, clarity hit me. I remembered every late night, every weekend I sacrificed, every innovation I'd built that kept this company alive. And I realized something brutal and undeniable, none of it mattered. Not to them. Not to Mark. They didn't see me as an asset. They saw me as a threat. And threats get neutralized. So I had two choices. I could play along, smile through gritted teeth, let them strip me down until I was either gone or grateful just to keep scraps. Or I could fight back. And fighting back meant doing what I did best. Systems. Strategy. Precision. If Mark wanted to play games, fine. But he forgot the most important rule. I built the machine. I knew where every wire ran, where every weakness hid, where every skeleton was buried. And if I wanted to, I could bring the whole damn house down on top of him. That night, I opened a new folder on my laptop. I named it simply, Insurance. Inside, I began compiling everything, emails, reports, system logs, financial metrics. Proof that I was the one saving millions. Proof that Mark had been taking credit, manipulating narratives, misleading executives. The deeper I dug, the uglier it got. I found projects where Mark had falsified timelines to make himself look more efficient. I found budget approvals he'd pushed through with numbers I generated, without giving me credit. I even found a few questionable expense reports buried in the system. By 3 a.m., I had a mountain of evidence. Enough to ruin him. I leaned back in my chair, exhausted but buzzing with adrenaline. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm. Because now, I had the upper hand. Mark thought he'd cornered me. But what he didn't realize was that cornered animals don't just curl up and die. Sometimes, they bite. And I was ready to sink my teeth in. The Monday after I created my insurance folder, I walked into the office with a different energy. Outwardly, nothing had changed, same slacks, same button-down shirt, same tired walk to my desk with a coffee in hand. But inside? I was sharper, colder. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was hunting. Mark had no idea that every fake smile, every dismissive comment, every smug meeting where he stole my credit was now just fuel. He thought he'd broken me. What he didn't realize was that he'd only sharpened my focus. The first part of my plan was simple: documentation. Every time he so much as breathed in my direction, I logged it. When he cut me off in a meeting, I wrote the time, date, and exact words. When he hinted about salaries or team alignment, I copied the chat logs. If he left a paper trail, and God, he was sloppy, I scooped it up and tucked it away. The second part? Building allies. That was trickier. Mark had poisoned a lot of wells already. Most of my coworkers saw me as the arrogant overpaid guy. But here's the thing, resentment has layers. And people talk when they think no one's listening. I started small. Casual conversations with the quieter analysts. Asking how they were doing, what they thought about workloads, how Mark treated them. At first, they kept it surface level, polite. But I listened. I really listened. And slowly, cracks appeared. One night, I stayed late with Sarah, a junior analyst who always got buried in grunt work. Over lukewarm pizza in the break room, she let it slip, "You know, Mark promised me a promotion last year. Said I'd move up if I kept pushing. But nothing. He doesn't even answer my emails half the time." Bingo. Another piece of the puzzle. I didn't push too hard, just nodded sympathetically, logged it in my mental file, and went back to work. The third part of my plan was the most delicate: preparing the bomb. See, the beauty of my position was that I had access to everything. Our systems were my systems. The code, the data, the metrics, all roads led back to me. Which meant I could trace exactly who touched what, when. And the deeper I dug, the dirtier Mark's fingerprints became. He wasn't just taking credit. He was reckless. I found entire budget variances he'd signed off on without proper approval. Expense reports with business dinners that sure as hell didn't look like business. Even emails where he massaged numbers before sending them up the chain. I didn't need to fabricate anything. The truth was damning enough. But revenge isn't just about exposing the truth. It's about timing. About making sure the fall happens in the most humiliating, irreversible way possible. So I bided my time. Smiled in meetings, nodded along when Mark said, "We're all in this together." Pretended to shrink a little smaller each week, so he thought his plan was working. Meanwhile, my insurance folder grew fatter by the day. And then, opportunity dropped into my lap. One Friday afternoon, Mark called me into his office. He was practically glowing, pacing behind his desk like a kid who'd just won the lottery. "Dan, great news. I've been asked to present our systems at the Executive Summit next month. Big deal. Huge. And I want you to help me prep the numbers." Of course he did. He wanted my brain, my data, my slides. But he'd stand on that stage and act like it was all him. I forced a smile. "Of course, Mark. Happy to help." Inside, though, my pulse quickened. The summit. Executives from every division. Board members. The CEO. The entire upper brass in one room, hanging on his words. That was it. The stage. The perfect trap. I spent the next 3 weeks working double time. By day, I prepped Mark's slides, polished his talking points, gave him the ammo he needed to look like a visionary. By night, I built my counterattack. A mirror deck, same slides, same numbers, but annotated with receipts. Screenshots, email chains, system logs showing my fingerprints on everything. And right alongside them? Mark's fabrications. His expense abuses. His timeline manipulations. His lies. I encrypted the file, uploaded it to a cloud account under a burner email, and scheduled it to send automatically to every executive's inbox at a precise time, right in the middle of his presentation. It wasn't just about exposing him. It was about spectacle. About pulling the rug out from under him when he thought he was at his peak. In the meantime, I kept weaving threads with coworkers. I didn't need them as friends, I needed them as witnesses. Seeds of doubt were already there, I just watered them. Did Mark ever follow up on that project you pitched? I'd ask casually. Or, funny how he forgets to CC you on emails, huh? Little nudges. Subtle, but effective. By the time summit day came, I wouldn't be the only one questioning him. And every night, when I closed my laptop and stared out at the city lights, I felt it building inside me. The anger, the betrayal, the weeks of humiliation, all hardening into something cold, precise, unstoppable. Mark thought he'd cut me down. What he didn't know was that I wasn't broken. I was sharpening the knife. And soon, I'd drive it straight into his back, right when he thought the whole world was clapping for him. The day of the summit, the entire office buzzed like it was Christmas morning. People dressed sharper than usual, suits pressed, shoes polished, smiles tight with ambition. It wasn't every day the CEO, board members, and division heads all gathered under one roof. For most employees, this was a once-a-year chance to rub shoulders with power. For Mark, it was his moment of glory. I watched him strut through the office that morning, navy suit perfectly tailored, silk tie knotted just right. He looked like a politician on campaign day, shaking hands, cracking jokes, slapping backs. Big day, team. We're going to knock their socks off. And to everyone else, he looked like the hero. The charismatic leader who'd turned our struggling department into a profit machine. They didn't see the parasite underneath, leeching credit from the work I'd bled for. But I saw him. And I knew by the end of the day, everyone else would too. The summit was held downtown in one of those high-rise hotels with marble floors, endless chandeliers, and conference rooms big enough to swallow our entire office building. When I arrived, I could feel the tension in the air, executives mingling, board members shaking hands, assistants buzzing around with laptops and notepads. I found my seat near the back of the presentation hall. Mark was already at the front, chatting with the COO, laughing a little too loud. He hadn't noticed me slip in, and that was fine. I wanted to watch him from a distance. Watch him climb higher and higher on that rope I'd so carefully laid out for him. The presentations rolled on, different departments boasting about quarterly numbers and strategic initiatives. Polite applause followed each. Then, finally, it was Mark's turn. He strutted up to the podium, clicked his mic on, and the screen behind him lit up with the deck I had built for him. My work, my numbers, my systems. Good afternoon, he said, smiling wide, his voice smooth and practiced. I'm thrilled to share with you the incredible progress we've made in logistics operations over the past year. Thanks to strategic leadership and a culture of innovation, we've saved the company millions while increasing efficiency across the board. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed, heart pounding. Here it comes. Slide after slide, he basked in the glow of my results. Talking about our innovations, our breakthroughs, my leadership. Every time he said I wanted to put my fist through the table. But I kept still. Calm. Because the storm was coming. Halfway through, right as he clicked onto the slide showing year-over-year cost savings, my crown jewel, the room's collective attention sharpened. The executives leaned in. This was the slide they cared about. The proof of success. And that's when the first phone started buzzing. 1. Then 2. Then a ripple through the room, executives glancing down at screens, eyebrows lifting. Mark hesitated at the podium, glancing around, clearly noticing the distraction. He pressed on, his voice tightening. But I knew what was happening. At exactly 2:37 p.m., right on schedule, the email hit their inboxes. Subject, Logistics Department Contributions, Source Documentation. From, an anonymous burner account. Inside, the mirror deck I'd built. My slides, annotated with receipts. Screenshots of code commits with my name. Email chains where I handed Mark the numbers he claimed as his own. System logs tracing every optimization back to me. And, most damning, copies of his falsified reports, expense abuses, and manipulations. All lined up neatly, side by side with the official version he was presenting on stage. The truth, undeniable. I watched the CEO's jaw tighten as he scrolled through his phone. The CFO frowned, whispering something to the board chair. Phones lit up like fireflies across the room. Executives leaned toward each other, murmuring. Mark faltered. His voice cracked mid-sentence. He clicked to the next slide, but half the room wasn't even looking at him anymore, they were reading my email. My evidence. What's going on? He tried to joke, chuckling nervously. Did I miss a memo? No one laughed. The COO raised his hand. Mark, can you clarify the source of these numbers? Mark blinked, stammering. The leadership team compiled them, through, collaboration across. His words trailed off as he realized no one was buying it. Another executive spoke up. Because I'm looking at documentation right now that suggests these systems weren't your work at all. In fact, it looks like they were developed by Daniel Carter? Every head in the room turned at me. The blood rushed to my face, but I held their gaze. Calm. Steady. Mark's face went pale. He glanced at me, then back at the executives, scrambling. Well, of course Dan contributed, he's part of my team, but as manager The CEO cut him off. Enough. We'll be discussing this after the session. His tone was sharp, final. Mark stood there, sweating under the spotlight, his grand presentation crumbling around him. The rope snapped. And I was the one who'd pulled it. For the rest of the summit, he was a ghost. The confident strut gone, replaced by a hollow shell barely holding it together. People avoided him. The same executives who'd shaken his hand an hour ago now gave him cold, clipped nods. And me? I didn't need to say a word. My work spoke louder than any speech. As the summit ended and people filed out, Mark sat slumped in a chair, staring at the floor. I walked past him, pausing just long enough to lean in and whisper so only he could hear. You should have been grateful. And then I walked out, leaving him in the wreckage. But the real fallout hadn't even begun. If the summit was the explosion, the weeks that followed were the firestorm. The Monday after, the office was silent in a way I'd never experienced before. Not the usual sleepy quiet of a Monday morning, but tense, like everyone was waiting for something to happen. People spoke in hushed tones. Phones rang less. Even the break room felt eerie, as though the walls themselves knew a reckoning was coming. Mark came in late that morning. Normally, he'd sweep through the floor like a conquering general, but this time, he slipped in red-eyed and hollow. His tie was crooked. His shoulders hunched. He didn't look at anyone. He just trudged straight to his office and shut the door. I pretended to work, but my eyes kept drifting to the glass wall of his office. Normally, he kept his blinds open, he loved being visible, watching us from his perch. But today, the blinds were drawn tight. A fortress. And then came the meetings. First, the HR manager walked in. Then the CFO. Then the head of compliance. They filed into his office one by one, shutting the door behind them. Through the blinds, I could see shadows moving, hands gesturing sharply. Every so often, a muffled voice would rise, Mark's, desperate, defensive. The meeting stretched for hours. By the time the sun dipped low and the office emptied, the blinds finally opened. Mark sat slumped at his desk, pale and sweating, staring at nothing. He didn't leave until well past 9. The next day, the whispers began. Did you hear? He's under investigation. Apparently he's been fudging reports for years. HR's digging through all his expense accounts. There's talk of misuse of funds. I stayed quiet, head down, letting the rumors swirl around me. I didn't need to feed them, they had their own momentum now. By Wednesday, Mark's swagger was gone completely. He stopped holding meetings. Stopped joking in the hallways. He walked with his head down, clutching a binder like a shield. The same analysts who used to laugh at his jokes now avoided eye contact, slipping past him without a word. And then the hammer dropped. Friday morning, an all-staff email went out, effective immediately. Mark Reynolds has been placed on administrative leave pending further review. The floor erupted. Slack channels lit up. Some people were shocked, others pretended to be shocked, but I could see the truth in their eyes, relief. Relief that the bully had finally stumbled. Relief that the untouchable had been touched. Mark didn't even come in that day. HR escorted him out before most of us arrived, his belongings stuffed into a cardboard box. No goodbye speeches. No handshakes. Just gone. But that wasn't the end. The following week, word spread that the board had gotten involved. They'd uncovered inconsistencies in his quarterly reports going back years. Misallocated funds. Inflated projections. Even a few questionable vendor contracts that looked suspiciously like kickbacks. It was worse than I'd even hoped. By the time the dust settled, Mark's reputation was radioactive. He wasn't just fired, he was blacklisted. His LinkedIn went silent. His name vanished from industry newsletters. Friends in other companies told me recruiters were steering clear. No one wanted to touch him. Meanwhile, I thrived. The executives called me into a meeting 2 weeks later. They asked me to walk them through the systems, explain how everything really worked. For the first time, I got to speak for myself, not through Mark's filter, not through his spin. Just me and my work. And they listened. Really listened. When I finished, the CEO leaned back, studying me. "Daniel, you've done remarkable things here. We owe a great deal to your contributions. From this point forward, I want you reporting directly to the VP of Operations. No middlemen." I nodded, hiding the grin tugging at the corners of my mouth. Happy to. As I left that room, walking past rows of desks where people now looked at me with new respect, maybe even awe, I felt something deep and cold settle in my chest. Justice. Mark thought he could erase me. Thought he could paint me as ungrateful, overpaid, replaceable. But in the end, he erased himself. And all I had to do was let him. The strangest part wasn't Mark's downfall. It was the silence that followed. After the storm of the summit, the investigations, and the gossip, the office grew lighter. People smiled more. Meetings ran smoother. Deadlines weren't weighed down by the constant pressure of appeasing his ego. It was like someone had opened a window and let the stench out. And me? For the first time in years, I felt free. I didn't have to walk on eggshells, waiting for the next backhanded compliment or public ambush. I didn't have to watch someone else twist my work into their glory. I could sit at my desk, do what I loved, and know that when the numbers spoke, they'd point directly to me. But Mark wasn't done suffering. Oh no. The deeper the board dug, the uglier it got. He'd been siphoning company funds into consulting contracts with shell companies. He padded travel expenses, claimed luxury dinners as team morale boosters, even billed the company for a weekend getaway he took with his mistress. When the news broke internally, jaws dropped. Some people laughed, others cursed his name. For me, it was vindication. Proof that I hadn't just been paranoid, that my instincts were right all along. He wasn't just incompetent. He was rotten. The company pressed charges. Fraud, embezzlement, falsification of financial records. They wanted to make an example out of him. He'd once bragged about being untouchable, about how executives loved him too much to ever let him fall. Now he was in court, his name dragged through headlines, his smug face plastered across articles about corporate corruption. And every time I saw his photo, eyes hollow, hair unkempt, that arrogance drained from him, I thought back to that day in his office when he told me I should be grateful. Grateful. He was the one who should have been grateful. Grateful I built the systems that made him look good. Grateful I never cared about the spotlight. Grateful I stayed loyal far longer than he deserved. Instead, he chose to knife me in the back. And that choice had cost him everything. Meanwhile, my life transformed. The executives gave me a raise, ironically, one that put me far beyond the overpaid number Mark used to mock. They offered me a team of my own, the freedom to expand my systems, and a direct line to leadership. But more than that, I gained something I hadn't realized I'd lost: self-respect. For too long, I'd let myself believe that being good at my job was enough, that the work would always speak for itself. But I'd learned the hard way that predators like Mark don't care about truth. They care about power. And the only way to beat them is to take that power back. Mark's ruin was total. His LinkedIn disappeared. His house went up for sale. I heard through a contact that his wife left him when the mistress came out in the investigation. Last I checked, he was applying to entry-level consultant gigs in cities far from Chicago. No one wanted him. Not with his name burned into the industry blacklist. And me? I slept better at night. I took vacations I used to skip. I visited my parents without guilt. I went out with friends instead of working until 2 a.m. on projects no one would credit me for. I built the machine that made them millions. And when they tried to cut me down, I proved something even more valuable. I wasn't just the machine. I was the one who knew how to burn it down and rebuild it stronger. My freedom came not from leaving the company, but from tearing off the shackles of silence. From showing that sometimes the best revenge isn't just justice, it's watching your enemy choke on the very rope they tied around your neck. Mark was gone. His empire of lies reduced to ashes. And I was still here, stronger, sharper, untouchable in ways he never was. That's when I finally understood. Revenge isn't about hate. It's about balance. About resetting the scale when someone tilts it too far in their favor. About making sure the world remembers who you are and what you're worth. And in the end, I didn't just survive Mark. I buried him. The months after Mark's downfall felt surreal. The same hallways I once trudged through with a pit in my stomach now felt wide open, like someone had lifted a weight off the entire building. For years, I'd been the engine in the shadows, running myself ragged while he soaked up the glory. Now, for the first time, my name carried its own gravity. People stopped me in the break room just to say, "Hey, thanks for making our jobs easier." Junior analysts came to me for guidance instead of Mark. Executives started inviting me into meetings where strategy was set, not just executed. I wasn't just the guy behind the curtain anymore. I was in the room. But it wasn't the praise that gave me closure. It was the quiet. The peace of knowing I didn't have to look over my shoulder anymore. No more ambushes in conference rooms, no more whispers about being overpaid, no more smirks from a man who thought he could crush me. That constant knot in my chest had finally unraveled. And yet, I didn't forget. Sometimes, late at night, I'd think about him. Mark. Where he was. What he was doing. I'd picture him sitting in some dingy apartment, scrolling job boards, each rejection email another reminder of the empire he'd lost. Maybe he was drinking too much. Maybe he was staring at the ceiling, wondering how it had all slipped away. And I'd remember the look on his face at the summit, when the phones buzzed and the room turned against him. That flicker of panic, the sweat beading on his forehead, the smirk finally wiped clean. I replayed it sometimes, not out of cruelty, but as proof. Proof that karma wasn't just a fairy tale. Proof that the universe, when nudged in the right direction, could serve just as sharper than any blade. But here's the thing, I didn't just destroy Mark. I rebuilt myself. I learned that silence isn't loyalty when it means letting someone else bury you alive. I learned that sometimes you have to fight dirty, because people like Mark don't play fair. And I learned that revenge, when earned, isn't about rage, it's about reclaiming your worth. My career soared in the aftermath. Within a year, I wasn't just leading a team. I was leading an entire division. My salary doubled. And this time, no one dared call me overpaid. Because now, everyone knew exactly why I earned every cent. I also stopped sacrificing my life for work. I took real vacations. I started dating again. I spent weekends with friends, reconnected with family. I wasn't the ghost in the office anymore, defined only by endless hours and hidden brilliance. I was Daniel Carter. 34, alive, thriving, and finally free. And if anyone ever tried to cut me down again? I knew I had the spine to fight back. Looking back, I don't hate Mark. Not anymore. In some twisted way, he gave me the push I needed. He forced me to stop being invisible. He taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. That no matter how much blood and sweat you pour into something, there will always be people who try to steal it, diminish it, or erase it. And when that happens, you can't just sit quietly and hope the truth comes out. You have to make it come out. So yes, when I saved them millions, my manager told me I was overpaid. But in the end, I made sure he paid the price. And walking into my new office, sunlight pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows, my team buzzing with ideas and energy, I finally understood what closure really felt like. Not just revenge. Not just survival. A new dawn.